Before another thought runs automatically through your mind, listen carefully. Most people do not control their thoughts. They control them. They believe every thought they have is true. They react emotionally and call it logic. They let their impulses decide their actions, then wonder why their lives feel unstable. Every reaction you regret, every bad decision, every moment of self-sabotage begins with one thing: an unexamined thought you allowed to take command. This audiobook is about taking that command back. Not motivation, not positivity. Control. If you do not learn how to think clearly, deliberately, and independently, your mind will become the most dangerous enemy you will ever face. Now, before we begin Chapter 1, do this. Subscribe to this channel. Not later. Not after the video. Now. This channel is built for people who refuse to live reactively, who want discipline over chaos and clarity over noise. If you stay with this audiobook until the end, you will gain a mental advantage most people never develop. This is critical thinking mastery. Chapter 1 begins now. Chapter 1. Your mind is not on your side. Let's start with a truth most people never accept. Your mind is not designed to help you succeed. It is designed to keep you alive. That's the key. Your brain evolved in a world of physical danger, scarcity, and constant threat. Its job was simple: detect risk fast and react faster. Fight, freeze, run, survive. It was never built for truth. It was never built for clarity. It was never built for long-term success. And yet, you are letting this survival machine run your modern life. You have a choice. Most of your thoughts are not intelligent conclusions. They are automatic threat responses. When your heart rate spikes before a meeting, that is not insight. When you overthink a message you sent, that is not intuition. When you feel the urge to defend yourself, explain yourself, or retreat, that is not wisdom. That is your survival brain doing its job. And in the modern world, that job is often destructive. Your mind produces thoughts. You decide which ones deserve authority. Most people never make that decision. They assume every thought is true. They assume every feeling is a signal. They assume every impulse deserves action. That assumption quietly ruins lives. Let's look at how this plays out in the real world. You are in a meeting. Someone challenges your idea. Immediately, your mind fires a thought: they don't respect me. That thought triggers emotion. That emotion triggers a reaction. You interrupt. You get defensive. You speak too fast. You try to prove yourself. Afterward, you regret it. Not because you lacked intelligence, because you lacked discipline. Your mind detected a social threat. You obeyed it. You have a choice. Another example: you receive an email from your boss or a client. The tone feels short. Your mind immediately fills in the story. They're unhappy. I messed up. This is bad. Your stress spikes. You stop focusing. You replay the email again and again. Hours of energy wasted. Nothing actually happened. Only a thought. Your mind produces thoughts. You decide which ones deserve authority. Now look at money. You see a headline: market crash coming. Your brain reacts to danger. You feel urgency, fear, pressure. You sell, you panic, you make emotional decisions. Not because you analyzed facts, but because your survival brain hates uncertainty. It's not about intelligence. It's about discipline. This is why smart people sabotage themselves. This is why capable people stay stuck. This is why emotional reactions destroy careers, finances, and relationships. Your brain is loud, but loud does not mean right. That's the key. Your mind is optimized for speed, not accuracy. Speed keeps you alive in the wild. Accuracy builds success in the modern world. And speed without accuracy creates chaos. You have a choice. Most people never slow the process down. They react first. They think later, they justify afterward. That order is backward. Let's be very clear. A thought is not a command. A feeling is not a fact. An impulse is not an obligation. Say it again. A thought is not a command. A feeling is not a fact. An impulse is not an obligation. Your mind will constantly offer interpretations. Most of them are designed to protect your ego and avoid discomfort. Avoid embarrassment. Avoid rejection. Avoid uncertainty. Avoid effort. Your mind will tell you to stay quiet when you should speak. It will tell you to speak when you should stay quiet. It will tell you to quit when progress feels uncomfortable. It will tell you to attack when patience would be the better option. And if you follow it automatically, you lose. You don't need your mind to like your decisions. You need your mind to obey your discipline. That's the shift. This chapter is not about fighting your thoughts. Fighting creates more noise. This chapter is about authority. Who is in charge? Right now, for most people, the answer is clear. Their mind speaks. They react. No filter. No pause. No evaluation. That's not freedom. That's reflex. And the reflex is predictable. Predictable people are easy to manipulate, easy to provoke, easy to control. You have a choice. Let's talk about relationships. Your partner says something. Your mind interprets tone, intention, and meaning, often incorrectly. You react to the story, not the words. Arguments escalate. Distance grows. Resentment builds. Not because the relationship is broken, but because neither person is thinking clearly. Untrained thinking is expensive. It costs trust. It costs respect. It costs peace. Now look at self-talk. Your mind constantly comments on you. You're behind. You should be further. You're not enough. Those thoughts feel personal. They feel true. They feel urgent. There are none of those things. They are pressure signals, survival mechanisms. Your brain uses shame and fear to push action. That worked when survival depended on staying in the group. Today, it destroys confidence. You have a choice. Here is the discipline you must build. You do not immediately believe what you think. You observe it. You pause. You ask one question, is this thought useful or is it just loud? That's the beginning of critical thinking. Not arguing with the thought, not suppressing it, not replacing it with positivity, evaluating it. Most people never evaluate their thoughts. They obey them as if they were orders from a superior. But your mind is not your leader. It is a tool. And a tool without discipline becomes a weapon against its owner. That's the key. Here is a simple behavioral rule you must adopt. When a thought creates urgency, slow down. When a thought creates fear, pause. When a thought demands immediate action, wait. You don't need their permission. You don't need your mind's permission either. You decide when action happens. This is not about becoming passive. It's about becoming precise. You act after clarity, not before. Let's make this practical. Starting today, whenever you feel emotionally charged, do one thing. You name the thought, not the emotion. The thought behind it. I am thinking that I am being disrespected. I am thinking that this will fail. I am thinking that they will judge me. That language matters. It creates distance. Distance creates control. Control creates freedom. Your mind produces thoughts. You decide which ones deserve authority. That sentence must become automatic, because if you don't choose, your survival brain will choose for you. And it will always choose comfort over growth, short-term relief over long-term strength. You have a choice. This chapter is about reclaiming that choice. You are not broken. Your mind is not evil. It is simply outdated. And outdated systems must be managed, not obeyed. You don't rise to the level of your intelligence. You fall to the level of your thinking discipline. That's the reality. You now understand the first and most important truth of this audiobook. Your mind is not on your side by default. It will test you. It will mislead you. It will exaggerate threats and minimize opportunities. Your job is not to silence it. Your job is to lead it. You have a choice. You have taken the first step. Awareness. Now comes the next discipline. If your thoughts are not commands, then what are they? Suggestions. And not all suggestions deserve action. You've learned your mind is not on your side. Now you must learn how to stop obeying it automatically. Chapter 2. Thoughts are suggestions, not orders. Let's continue with a distinction that will change how you live. Your thoughts are not orders, they are suggestions. That's the key. Most people never learn this. They hear a thought and act on it immediately. No pause, no filter, no evaluation. A thought appears, and they obey. That is not thinking. That is reflex, and reflex keeps you average, reactive, and controlled. You have a choice. Your mind will constantly suggest things to you. Say something. Defend yourself. Quit now. Send the message. Buy it. Avoid this. Prove yourself. Suggestions, not commands. But because those suggestions arrive with emotion, urgency, and familiarity, most people treat them as law. They mistake intensity for importance. That mistake costs them everything. Let's slow this down. A command comes from authority. A suggestion comes from possibility. Your mind has no authority unless you give it one. Read that again. Your mind has no authority unless you give it one. You don't need your mind's permission to pause. You don't need its permission to wait. You don't need its permission to choose differently. That's discipline. Here's what usually happens. A thought appears. This is uncomfortable. Immediately the body reacts. Tension, stress, urgency, and the mind follows with a second suggestion, make it stop. That's where people lose control. They mistake discomfort for danger. They mistake anxiety for intuition. They mistake impatience for insight. And they act. They speak when silence would win. They quit when persistence would pay. They distract themselves when focus would transform. Not because they are weak, because they are untrained. You have a choice. Let's look at a real example. You are working on something important, something that requires focus. Your mind suggests, check your phone. It feels small, harmless, but you obey. Why? Because the thought arrived with a subtle reward signal. Relief, novelty, escape, but again, suggestion, not ordered. Every time you obey that suggestion, you reinforce a habit. And habits decide outcomes. It's not about the phone, it's about authority. Who decides where your attention goes? Another example, you're about to say something honest, something necessary. Your mind suggests they might not like this. Fear appears. The suggestion follows. Stay quiet. You obey. Not because silence was the right choice, but because the suggestion felt urgent. Over time, that pattern builds a life of hesitation. Careers stall. Relationships stay shallow. Respect erodes. Not because you lacked ability, because you followed suggestions without question. That's the key. High-level thinkers do one thing differently. They delay obedience. They don't ask, what do I feel like doing? They ask, what deserves action? That gap changes everything. Between thought and action, there must be discipline. Without that gap, you are programmable. Marketing exploits it. Social pressure exploits it. Your own fear exploits it. You have a choice. Let's make this practical. From now on, you adopt one rule. no action on first thought. Say it again, no action on first thought. The first thought is always primitive, fast, emotional, protective. It is designed to move you, not guide you. You wait for the second thought. The second thought is slower, more deliberate, more accurate. But it only appears if you don't obey the first one immediately. That's discipline. This is why impulsive people feel busy but never progress. They are constantly responding to suggestions. They confuse motion with direction. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer reactions. It's not about force. It's about restraint. Restraint is power. Every time you do not act on a thought, you weaken its authority. Every time you pause, you strengthen yours. Your mind produces thoughts. You decide which ones deserve authority. Let's address a common mistake. People think ignoring thoughts means suppressing them. Wrong. Suppression creates pressure. Pressure explodes later. Evaluation creates control. You let the thought exist, you just don't follow it unthinkingly. You acknowledge it like a suggestion from someone you don't fully trust. You listen. You don't obey automatically, that's the key. Here's another real-world scenario. You're angry. Your mind suggests, send the message, let them know. It feels justified. It feels powerful. You pause, you ask, what happens if I obey this? Not morally, strategically. Does this move my life forward? Does this improve the situation? Does this align with who I'm becoming? Most of the time, the answer is no. Anger wants expression. Discipline wants results. You choose. You don't need their permission to stay silent. You don't need your mind's permission either. Silence is not weakness. It is delayed strength. Another example, you feel bored. Your mind suggests distraction, scrolling, snacking, switching tasks. Boredom is not a problem. It's a threshold. On the other side of boredom is depth, but most people never cross it. They obey the suggestion to escape, and so they live shallow lives. You have a choice. The uncomfortable truth is this, and if you always do what your thoughts suggest, you will always live the life your habits allow. And habits do not negotiate. This chapter is about breaking that automatic loop. Thought, reaction, regret. You replace it with thought, pause, choice. That pause is where freedom lives. Not freedom from thoughts, freedom from obedience. Let's install a simple behavioral practice. When a thought suggests action, ask one question. Is this a reaction or a decision? If it's a reaction, you wait. If it's a decision, you proceed. That single question will save you years. You will speak less and be heard more. You will act less and achieve more. You will react less and respect yourself more. That's the key. This chapter is not about overthinking. Overthinking is still obedience to noise. This is about disciplined thinking, fewer actions, better timing. You don't need to control every thought, you only need to control your actions. Thoughts lose power when they stop producing behavior. Remember this, a thought that is not acted on eventually fades. A thought that is obeyed becomes a pattern. You decide what patterns rule your life. You have a choice. By now, you understand two foundational truths. Your mind is not on your side by default, and its thoughts are suggestions, not orders. But there is still a problem. Many suggestions come wrapped in strong emotion. Fear, anger, excitement. They feel convincing. That's the next layer we must dismantle. You've learned to pause. Now you must learn why emotion is such a dangerous advisor. You stopped obeying thoughts automatically. Now let's expose the trap that makes bad thoughts feel true. Chapter 3. Emotion is not intelligence. This is where most people lose control. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they trust how they feel more than how they think. That's the key. Emotion feels convincing. Emotion feels urgent. Emotion feels true. And that is exactly why it is dangerous. Emotion evolved to move your body, not to guide your judgment. Fear makes you run. Anger makes you attack. Excitement makes you leap. None of those reactions requires accuracy. They require speed. Your emotions are not designed to understand context, nuance, or long-term consequences. They are designed to create motion. And motion without direction destroys lives. You have a choice. Most people treat emotions as evidence. I feel this way, so it must be right. This feels wrong, so I should avoid it. I'm angry, so they deserve it. That logic is flawed. Emotion is data, not direction. Say it again. Emotion is data, not direction. High-level thinkers acknowledge emotion without obeying it. Low-level thinkers obey emotion and call it authenticity. That mistake costs them everything. Let's look at fear. Fear is not a warning. It is a signal of uncertainty. Your brain hates uncertainty. It prefers known pain over an unknown possibility. That's why fear appears before growth. That's why fear spikes before opportunity. A job interview, a difficult conversation, a new venture. Fear says, stay where you are. And most people listen, not because staying is right, but because fear is loud. You have a choice. Fear does not mean stop. It means to evaluate. But most people never evaluate. They retreat. That's why potential stays unused. Now look at anger. Anger creates clarity. False clarity. It simplifies the world into enemies and allies. Right and wrong. Win or lose. That feels powerful. But anger strips away nuance. It narrows vision. It reduces intelligence. That's why angry decisions feel justified in the moment and regrettable later. Every time. Anger wants expression. Discipline wants results. That's the difference. You don't need their permission to stay calm. You don't need your emotions' permission either. Calm is not weakness. It is strategic superiority. Now look at excitement. Excitement is the most underestimated threat. It feels positive, so people trust it. But excitement creates impulsive commitments. Overpromising, overspending, overconfidence. Excitement ignores risk. It says this will work out. That is not intelligence, that is hope. Hope without structure is gambling. You have a choice. Emotion amplifies thoughts. If the thought is wrong, emotion makes it louder. Fear amplifies doubt. Anger amplifies blame. Excitement amplifies optimism. Emotion does not create truth. It magnifies whatever is already there. That's the key. This is why untrained thinking becomes dangerous under stress. Pressure does not create weakness. It reveals it. When pressure rises, people default to emotion-driven decisions. They react, they rush, they regret. You don't rise under pressure, you reveal your level of discipline, and that's reality. Let's make this practical. From now on, you apply one rule. Strong emotion equals delayed action. Say it again. Strong emotion equals delayed action. When emotion spikes, you do nothing important. No decisions, no messages, no commitments. You wait. Waiting is not avoidance. It is control. This single rule will save your career, your money, and your relationships. You have a choice. Let's look at a real scenario. You receive criticism, your chest tightens. Anger rises. Your mind says, respond now. Defend yourself. You pause. You recognize emotion. You delay action. Later, when emotion fades, clarity appears. You respond calmly, precisely, with strength. The outcome changes completely. Same intelligence, different discipline. Another scenario. You feel discouraged. Progress feels slow. Your mind says, "This isn't working. Quit." That is not insight. That is fatigue speaking. Emotion is temporary. Decisions are permanent. You wait. The next day, motivation returns. Momentum continues. You win. That's the key. Emotion is the weather. It changes. You don't rebuild your life based on today's weather. You have a choice. Most people let emotions drive their schedule, tone, spending, and standards. High performers let emotions pass. They don't suppress. They don't explode. They observe. They understand this. Emotion demands attention. It does not deserve obedience. Your mind produces thoughts. Your body produces feelings. You produce decisions. That hierarchy matters. If you reverse it, chaos follows. Let's address a dangerous belief. People say, "I'm just being honest with how I feel." That is not honesty. That is impulsiveness. Honesty without discipline is cruelty. Expression without timing is sabotage. True strength is measured by what you restrain, not what you express. You don't need their permission to be composed. You don't need your emotions' permission either. This chapter is about separating signal from authority. Emotion signals that something is happening. It does not tell you what to do. You decide what to do. You have a choice. By now, you understand something critical. Your mind is not on your side. Your thoughts are suggestions, not orders. Your emotions are not intelligence. But there is still one problem. Even when you understand this, a reaction still happens. Why? Because reaction is automatic. The next discipline is learning how to interrupt that automatic loop. You've learned not to obey emotion. Now you must learn how to break the reaction itself. Chapter 4. Stop reacting. Start interrupting. Reaction is automatic. Interruption is trained. That's the key. Most people think they have a reaction problem. They don't. They have an interruption problem. Reaction happens before thinking, before evaluation, before choice. And if you don't learn how to interrupt that process, everything you learned in the previous chapters stays theoretical. You have a choice. Reaction is fast. It feels natural. It feels justified. That's why it wins. But reaction is not power. Reaction is surrender. Every time you react automatically, you hand control to whatever triggered you. A comment, a message, a look, a tone. You become programmable. That is the opposite of mastery. Let's be clear. You don't rise to the level of your intentions. You fall to the level of your systems. If you don't build a system for interruption, reaction will always win. That's reality. Most people believe interruption means suppression. Wrong. Suppression is a force. Interruption is a structure. Suppression says, "Don't feel this." Interruption says, "Not yet." Timing is everything. You have a choice. Reaction follows a predictable pattern. Trigger, emotion, thought. Action, fast. Automatic, unexamined. An interruption inserts one thing into that chain, a pause. That pause is not a weakness. That pause is dominance. Whoever controls the pause controls the outcome. That's the key. Let's look at a real-world example. Someone criticizes you, the trigger hits, emotion spikes, thought appears, "I need to respond." Most people react within seconds. Tone escalates. Defensiveness appears. Damage is done. Now let's interrupt. Same trigger, same emotion, but instead of acting, you pause. 2 seconds, 3 seconds, That's enough. In that pause, emotion peaks and begins to fall. You don't need it to disappear. You just need it to weaken. Now you choose response instead of reaction. Different tone, different outcome, same situation. That pause changes everything. You have a choice. Interruption is not about thinking harder. It's about acting later. Delayed action is disciplined action. Immediate action is emotional action. And emotional action is expensive. It costs credibility. It costs leverage. It costs respect. Let's talk about urgency. Urgency is reaction's favorite disguise. Everything feels urgent when emotion is involved. Reply now. Fix this now. Decide now. Most urgency is artificial, manufactured by emotion, amplified by fear. If something truly matters, it can survive a pause. That's the test. If a decision collapses when delayed, it was weak to begin with. You have a choice. Here is the rule you install starting today: no meaningful action without interruption. Say it again. No meaningful action without interruption. Meaningful action includes sending emotional messages, making commitments, making purchases, escalating conflict, quitting, confronting. You pause first, always. This is not hesitation. This is a command. Let's make interruption practical. You need a physical cue because reaction happens in the body first. Heart rate rises, breathing shortens, muscles tense. That's your signal. When your body reacts, your mind is compromised. That's when interruption is mandatory. Your first tool is breath. Slow breath slows reaction, not deep breathing. Slow breathing. Inhale slowly, exhale slower. This tells the nervous system there is no immediate threat. Your survival brain quiets. Clarity returns. You don't need their permission to breathe. You don't need your mind's permission either. That's the first interruption. The second tool is delay language. You train yourself to say one phrase automatically. I'll respond later. Not out loud. Internally. This removes pressure. Pressure creates bad decisions. Time creates good ones. Every high-level negotiator knows this. Silence creates leverage. The person who reacts first loses. That's the key. Let's talk about social situations. Someone provokes you, jokes at your expense, challenges your authority. Reaction wants dominance now, but dominance through reaction is fragile. True dominance is calm. You interrupt. You don't rush to prove. You don't rush to defend. You wait. Often the other person exposes themselves. Reaction gives them control. Interruption gives you the room. You have a choice. Most people are addicted to expression. They think expressing immediately is a strength. It's not. Expression without control is immaturity. Control without expression is a strategy. You don't need to win every moment. You need to win outcomes. That's the difference. Interruption also applies internally. Negative self-talk appears. You're behind. You failed. This isn't working. Reaction is belief. Interruption is observation. You don't argue. You don't spiral. You note it. That's a thought. And you continue. You don't need to fix every thought. You just need to stop obeying them. That's the key. Let's be honest. The hardest part of interruption is discomfort. The pause feels uncomfortable. Silence feels awkward. Delay feels risky. That discomfort is the price of control. Most people refuse to pay it. They would rather react and feel relief now than pause and feel discomfort briefly. That choice keeps them average. You have a choice. Every interruption strengthens your discipline. Every pause weakens your impulses. This is a skill, and like every skill, it compounds. At first, the pause is forced. Later, it becomes natural. Eventually, reaction feels foreign. You become the calm one, the composed one, the one who doesn't rush. That presence alone changes how people treat you, because calm signals authority. Chaos signals weakness. That's the key. Let's install one final rule for this chapter. If you feel the urge to act immediately, don't. Urgency is not a signal to move. It is a signal to stop. You have a choice. Interruption is the bridge between awareness and control. You now know your mind is not on your side. You know thoughts are suggestions. You know emotion is not intelligence. But without interruption, knowledge means nothing. This chapter gave you the mechanism. Pause. Delay. Choose. You are no longer reacting unthinkingly. You are interrupting deliberately, and that changes who you are. You have mastered reaction. Now we must address something deeper. Why does your mind crave certainty so badly that it rushes you into bad decisions? Why does it cling to answers even when they are wrong? You've learned how to interrupt a reaction. Now let's expose the illusion that drives it. Chapter 5. The Illusion of Certainty. Your mind does not want the truth. It wants certainty. That's the key. Certainty feels safe. Certainty feels stable. Certainty feels like control. And your brain will choose false certainty over honest uncertainty every single time. You have a choice. The problem is not that people are wrong. The problem is that they are certain. Certainty shuts down thinking. It ends curiosity. It blocks learning. Once your mind decides, I know, it stops listening. That is how people get trapped. Let's be clear, certainty is emotional. Clarity is disciplined. Your survival brain hates ambiguity. It wants answers now, even bad answers. That's why your mind jumps to conclusions. Why does it label people quickly? Why does it lock onto beliefs and defend them aggressively? Defense is not intelligence. Defense is fear. You have a choice. Let's look at how certainty sabotages real life. You meet someone new, they say something awkward. Your mind concludes, I don't like them. Certainty achieved. You stop observing, you stop learning, you treat them through that lens, and you are blind to who they actually are. That certainty costs you opportunity. Another example, you fail at something once. Your mind concludes, I'm bad at this. Certainty achieved. You stop trying. You avoid discomfort. Your growth ends, not because of reality, because of a story. That's the key. Certainty feels like confidence, but it is often laziness disguised as strength. Real confidence tolerates not knowing. It says, I don't know yet. That sentence terrifies the ego, because the ego equates not knowing with weakness. It is wrong. Not knowing is the starting point of mastery. You have a choice. High-level thinkers operate differently. They resist premature certainty, that they hold conclusions lightly. They update their beliefs when new information appears. They do not cling. They do not rush. They understand this. The faster you need certainty, the weaker your thinking. Urgency to conclude is insecurity. That's the key. Let's talk about opinions. Most people form opinions emotionally and then defend them intellectually. They don't think. They justify. That is why debates go nowhere. Each side is protecting certainty, not seeking truth. You see this in politics, in business, in relationships. Certainty creates conflict. Curiosity creates resolution. You have a choice. Now let's talk about self-certainty. I am this kind of person. I always fail at this. This is just how I am. Those statements feel solid. They are prisons. Identity-based certainty is the most dangerous form, because once something becomes who you are, changing it feels like death. Your mind would rather stay stuck than uncertain. That's why people defend habits that hurt them. I'm just not disciplined. I'm not a morning person. I'm bad with money. Certainty achieved, growth avoided. You have a choice. Here is the discipline. You replace certainty with provisional thinking. No doubt, flexibility. You stop saying, "This is how it is." You start saying, "This is how it appears right now." That small shift keeps your mind open. Open minds learn. Closed minds repeat. That's the key. Let's make this practical. From now on, whenever you feel completely certain about something, you do one thing. You pause. You ask, "What am I missing?" Not to undermine yourself, but to expand perspective. This question interrupts arrogance, and certainty without humility becomes arrogance. Arrogance blinds. You have a choice. Another rule: the stronger the emotion, the less certain you should be. If anger is high, your certainty is unreliable. If fear is high, your conclusions are distorted. If excitement is high, your optimism is inflated. Emotion creates tunnel vision. Certainty inside a tunnel is dangerous. You slow down. You gather more information. You don't rush to closure. You don't need their permission to wait. You don't need your mind's permission either. Waiting is not a weakness. It is precision. Let's talk about leadership. Bad leaders crave certainty. They want quick answers. They want control, so they pretend to know. Good leaders tolerate uncertainty. They ask better questions. They delay decisions until patterns emerge. They adjust when reality changes. Certainty makes leaders rigid. Flexibility makes them effective. That's the difference. Let's talk about personal growth. People fail not because they lack information, but because they cling to conclusions. I tried this. It didn't work. I know myself. Number: you experienced one outcome. Certainty turned that outcome into a limit. You have a choice. Here is the core principle of this chapter. Certainty feels good, but it costs you truth. Clarity feels uncomfortable, but it gives you power. You must decide which one you value more. This audiobook is about mastery. Mastery requires humility. Humility is not self-doubt. It is openness. You don't need to be right, you need to be effective. That's the key. Now let's install one final practice. When you catch yourself thinking, "I know," replace it with, "Let's see." Those two words keep you sharp. They keep you learning. They keep you adaptable. Adaptable people survive change. Rigid people break. You have a choice. You now understand why the reaction happens so fast. Your mind rushes to certainty to reduce discomfort. You've learned to pause. You've learned to interrupt. You've learned to doubt certainty. Now comes the next discipline. If certainty is the trap, what replaces it? Questions. You must learn to think in terms of questions rather than conclusions. You've dismantled the reaction. You've exposed certainty. Now we build the tool of clarity. Chapter 6. Learn to think in questions, not conclusions. Conclusions end thinking. Questions keep it alive. That's the key. Most people live inside conclusions. They decide quickly, they label fast, they lock reality into simple stories. And once a conclusion is formed, behavior follows automatically. That is how people get trapped in the same patterns for years. You have a choice. High-level thinkers do something radically different. They delay conclusions. They operate in questions, not because they are uncertain, but because they are disciplined. A conclusion feels strong, a question feels weak. That is the illusion. In reality, conclusions are fragile. Questions are powerful. Let's break this down. A conclusion sounds like this. This person is disrespectful. This won't work. I'm not good at this. They always do this. Each conclusion shuts down thinking. Once you decide, your mind stops exploring. It only looks for confirmation. That's the trap. A question sounds like this. What exactly happened? What else could this mean? What part of this is under my control? What is the next useful step? Questions expand awareness. Awareness creates options. Options create power. That's the key. Most people confuse decisiveness with intelligence. They think fast conclusions mean strength. They don't. Fast conclusions mean impatience. You have a choice. Let's look at how this plays out in real life. You receive feedback. Your mind concludes, they're attacking me. Emotion rises, defensiveness follows. Now the outcome is predictable. But what if you interrupt and ask a question? What exactly are they pointing out? What part of this is valid? What can I improve? Same situation, different thinking, different result. You grow instead of reacting. That's the difference. Another example, something goes wrong. Your mind concludes, this always happens. I can't catch a break. That conclusion feels familiar, and familiarity feels true. But it is lazy thinking. You ask a question instead. What specifically failed? What assumption was wrong? What can I adjust next time? Now the problem becomes information, not identity. That changes everything. You have a choice. Conclusions are emotional shortcuts. Questions are cognitive tools. Shortcuts feel efficient. Tools create results. This is why elite performers think differently under pressure. Pressure makes most people collapse into conclusions. They simplify reality to reduce discomfort. High performers do the opposite. They ask better questions. They slow the process. They widen perspective. They resist the urge to know too fast. That's the key. Let's talk about self-judgment. Most people use conclusions to define themselves. I'm lazy. I'm bad with money. I'm not confident. Those are not insights. They are mental prisons. You don't need their permission to stop labeling yourself. You don't need your mind's permission either. You replace conclusions with questions. Not, what's wrong with me? But also, what system is missing? Not, why am I like this? But what behavior needs adjustment? Questions turn blame into strategy. Strategy creates progress. That's the key. Here's a rule you must adopt. Never conclude about yourself from a single outcome. Say it again. Never conclude about yourself from a single outcome. One failure is data. One mistake is feedback. One bad day is noise. Conclusions turn noise into identity. Questions turn data into growth. You have a choice. Now let's talk about conflict. The conflict escalates because both sides reach different conclusions. They're wrong. They're selfish. They don't understand. Once conclusions are formed, listening stops. But questions reopen space. What are they actually trying to achieve? What do they want that I don't see yet? What outcome would work for both of us? Questions disarm defensiveness. They shift the dynamic from attack to problem solving. That's power. You don't need to win arguments, you need to resolve outcomes. Questions do that, conclusions don't. That's the key. Let's install a practical framework. From now on, whenever you feel mentally stuck, you use this sequence. First question, what do I know for certain? Facts only. No interpretations, no assumptions. Second question, what am I assuming? Name the story, expose it. Third question, what is the most useful next step? not the perfect step, the useful one. This framework keeps you grounded. It prevents spirals. It prevents paralysis. You have a choice. Thinking in questions does not mean indecision. It means disciplined decision-making. You still decide, but you decide after exploration, not impulse. That's the difference between leaders and reactors. Leaders ask questions before they move. Reactors conclude and then justify. You don't need their permission to think deeply. You don't need your mind's permission either. Depth is not hesitation, it is precision. Now let's address an important misunderstanding. Some people use questions to avoid responsibility. They overanalyze. They loop endlessly. That is not disciplined questioning. That is fear disguised as thinking. Discipline has an endpoint. Questions are used to clarify action, not delay it forever. You ask until clarity appears, then you act. That's the key. Here's another rule. If a question does not lead to action, it is not useful. You are not here to intellectualize. You are here to execute wisely. Questions are tools, not entertainment. Now let's talk about thinking under pressure. When pressure rises, questions narrow. What do I do? How do I stop this? Those questions are still reactive. You must ask better ones. What matters most right now? What decision makes this better, not perfect? What can I control in the next 5 minutes? These questions restore agency. Agency calms the mind. Calm improves thinking. That's the loop. You have a choice. This chapter is about upgrading your thinking language. Conclusions are dead ends. Questions are doorways. Every time you conclude too fast, you close doors. Every time you ask a real question, you open one. That habit compounds. Over time, you become harder to trap, harder to provoke, harder to mislead. Because you don't react to appearances, you investigate reality. That's mastery. By now, you have learned how to slow reaction, tolerate uncertainty, and replace conclusions with questions. But there is still one silent force undermining your thinking: bias. Invisible, automatic, constant. You may think clearly, ask questions, and still be wrong because bias bends perception before you even notice. You've learned how to think better. Now you must learn why your thinking still lies to you. Chapter 7. Cognitive bias is quiet, constant, and costly. If you think clearly but ignore bias, you still lose. That's the key. Bias does not announce itself. It does not feel emotional. It does not feel irrational. Bias feels normal, and that is why it is dangerous. You have a choice. Cognitive bias is the silent filter through which your mind interprets reality. It operates before logic, before questions, before conscious thought. By the time you think you are being rational, bias has already shaped the options you see. Most people believe bias is a flaw of stupid people. That belief is false. Bias affects intelligent people more than anyone else, because intelligent people are better at justifying their bias. That's the trap. Bias does not disappear when you become smarter, it becomes more sophisticated. You have a choice. Let's define bias clearly. Bias is your brain's shortcut system. Simplifying reality reduces effort and uncertainty. Shortcuts save energy, but they distort the truth. And distorted truth leads to bad decisions. Quietly, repeatedly, expensively. That's the key. Let's start with the most common one: confirmation bias. Your mind looks for evidence that supports what it already believes and ignores what challenges it. Once you form an opinion, your brain becomes a defense attorney, not a judge, not an investigator, a defender. That's why people double down on bad decisions. That's why they stay in failing relationships. That's why they cling to broken strategies. They are not stupid, they are biased. You have a choice. Here's what confirmation bias looks like in real life. You believe someone is incompetent. You notice every mistake they make. You ignore their successes. Your belief feels confirmed, but the evidence was filtered. Another example. You believe you are bad at money. You remember every financial mistake. You ignore progress. That identity solidifies. Not because it's true, but because bias selected the evidence. Your mind produces thoughts. Bias selects the ones that feel familiar. You decide which ones deserve authority, and that's the key. Now let's talk about negativity bias. Your brain prioritizes negative information over positive. Why? Because threats mattered more than opportunities in survival. One danger could kill you. 10 successes did not guarantee safety. So your mind scans for problems constantly. That's why criticism sticks longer than praise. Why one bad comment ruins your day. Why one mistake overshadows 10 wins. Negativity bias keeps you alert, but it also keeps you anxious. Anxious thinking is narrow thinking. You have a choice. Negativity bias makes you overestimate risk and underestimate progress. That's why people feel behind even as they improve. That's why they quit too early. That's why they assume the worst. Your mind is not trying to sabotage you, it is trying to protect you. But protection without calibration becomes a limitation. That's the key. Now let's talk about ego bias. This one is subtle. Your mind wants to see itself as consistent, competent, and correct. So it resists information that threatens that image. That's why admitting mistakes feels painful. That's why feedback triggers defensiveness. That's why changing your mind feels like weakness. It's not a weakness. It's growth. But ego bias tells a different story. It says, if I was wrong, I am wrong. That equation is false. Being wrong about something does not make you a bad person. But ego bias blurs that line. You have a choice. Ego bias turns learning into an identity threat. So people protect their identity instead of updating their strategy. That's why smart people stay stuck. They would rather be consistently wrong than temporarily uncertain. That's the trap, let's be clear. Bias is not something you eliminate. It is something you manage. Anyone who thinks they are unbiased is the most biased person in the room. That's the key. So what do disciplined thinkers do? They assume bias is present, always. They don't ask, am I biased? They ask, how might I be biased right now? That question changes everything. You have a choice. Let's install a simple behavioral rule. Whenever you feel certain, assume bias. Certainty is bias's favorite hiding place. If you feel confident, pause. If you feel sure, question. If you feel obviously right, investigate. That discomfort you feel when challenged? That's not the truth being attacked. That's ego being threatened. You don't need their permission to question yourself. You don't need your mind's permission either. Self-questioning is not self-doubt, it is self-respect. That's the key. Let's make this practical. Here are 3 bias interrupts you must use. First, the opposite test. Ask, what evidence would prove me wrong? If you cannot answer that, you are not thinking. You are defending. Second, the outside view. Ask, if someone else were in this situation, what would I advise them? This bypasses ego bias. You often know the right answer for others. You just refuse to apply it to yourself. Third, the time test. Ask, will this matter in a year? Bias exaggerates immediacy. Time restores proportion. These questions don't remove bias. They weaken its grip. That's the goal. You have a choice. Now let's talk about decision making. Most bad decisions are not made because of a lack of information. They are made because of biased interpretation. People see what they want to see. They ignore what they fear. Bias distorts risk assessment. It distorts confidence. It distorts timing. That's why people enter too late, exit too early, and double down at the wrong time. Not stupidity, bias. Understanding this makes you dangerous, because once you assume bias is present, you slow down. You seek disconfirming evidence. You tolerate discomfort. You delay conclusions. That's the behavior of high-level decision makers. They don't rush clarity. They earn it. You have a choice. Let's talk about relationships. Bias causes misinterpretation. Tone becomes intent. Silence becomes rejection. Disagreement becomes disrespect. And conflict escalates. You think you are reacting to reality. You are reacting to a biased story. Once you see this, you stop personalizing everything. Not because you don't care, but because you care about accuracy. Accuracy creates peace. That's the key. Now let's address a dangerous mistake. Some people use bias as an excuse to never decide. They doubt everything. They freeze. That is not discipline. That is avoidance. The goal is not paralysis. The goal is calibrated action. You act with awareness of bias, not a denial of responsibility. You decide, but you decide, knowing your perception is imperfect. That humility makes you adaptable. Adaptable people survive complexity. Rigid people break. You have a choice. This chapter gave you a harsh truth. You cannot trust your first impression. You cannot trust your certainty. You cannot trust your comfort. But that is not a weakness. That is freedom. Because when you stop trusting bias, you start relying on discipline. And discipline can be trained. You now understand something critical. Your thoughts are shaped by bias before you even notice. Your emotions amplify those distortions. Your conclusions lock them in. But there is one more silent problem. Even if you manage bias, your mind still tells stories. Stories that feel real, stories that feel personal. And those stories create suffering. You've learned to question thoughts. You've learned to doubt certainty. You've learned to manage bias. Now you must separate the last illusion, the difference between facts and stories. Chapter 8. Separate facts from stories. Most of your suffering is not caused by facts. It is caused by the stories you attach to them. That's the key. A fact is neutral. A story is emotional. A fact simply exists. A story interprets, exaggerates, and personalizes. And if you don't learn to separate the two, your mind will turn neutral events into constant threats. You have a choice. Let's define this clearly. A fact is observable, measurable, concrete. A story is meaning layered on top of that fact. Most people don't see the difference. They live inside stories and call them reality. That mistake quietly drains energy, confidence, and clarity. Let's look at a simple example. Fact: someone didn't reply to your message. That's it. Story: they're ignoring me. I said something wrong. They don't respect me. Nothing in the facts supports those conclusions, but the story feels real. Emotion follows. Anxiety, resentment, self-doubt. Not because of the fact, because of the story. You have a choice. Here's another example. Fact: you made a mistake at work. Story: I always mess things up. I'm not cut out for this. They're going to notice. The fact is a single error. The story turns it into identity. That's the danger. Stories scale, facts don't. One fact stays one fact. One story can destroy an entire self-image. That's the key. Your mind is a storyteller. It evolved to create meaning fast. Meaning helped our ancestors survive. Today it creates unnecessary suffering. Your mind hates ambiguity, so it fills gaps. Silence becomes rejection. Neutral feedback becomes criticism. Delay becomes failure. And you believe it. You have a choice. High-level thinkers do something different. They separate observation from interpretation. They ask, what actually happened? What am I adding? That pause saves them. Most people never pause. They merge facts and stories into one emotional experience. That's why life feels overwhelming. Let's talk about relationships. Most conflicts are story-driven. Someone says something. Your mind assigns intent. They meant to hurt me. They don't care. They're trying to control me. Now you react to a story, not a person. Arguments escalate. Distance grows. Not because of what was said, but because of what was assumed. You have a choice. Let's talk about self-judgment. Fact, you didn't finish a task. Story, I'm lazy. I have no discipline. That story becomes an identity. Identity shapes behavior. Soon, you stop trying. Not because you can't, because the story says you won't. That's the key. Stories are powerful. But power without accuracy is dangerous. The mind prefers a bad explanation to no explanation. That's why stories feel so convincing. They provide closure. They reduce uncertainty. But closure based on fiction is costly. You have a choice. Here is the discipline. You stop reacting to stories. You respond only to facts. This is not denial. This is precision. You don't ignore emotions. You investigate them. Emotion often signals a story. Strong emotion without clear facts is your cue. You pause. You ask, what do I know for certain? What am I assuming? What story am I telling myself? Those questions dismantle illusion. That's the key. Let's make this practical. From now on, whenever you feel emotionally triggered, apply this framework. Step 1. State the fact. Out loud or internally. He didn't reply. I missed the deadline. She disagreed with me. No adjectives, no interpretation. Step 2. Identify the story. I'm being ignored. I'm incompetent. I'm being disrespected. Name it. Step 3. Decide deliberately. Ask, is this story useful? Is it proven? Does acting on this improve the outcome? Most stories fail this test. You let them go. That's discipline. You don't need their permission to drop a story. You don't need your mind's permission either. Stories are optional. That's the truth most people never realize. Your mind will always produce stories. You decide whether to live inside them. You have a choice. Let's address a critical misunderstanding. People think separating facts from stories makes you cold. It doesn't. It makes you accurate. Accuracy creates calm. Calm improves relationships. Calm improves decisions. Drama comes from stories. Stability comes from facts. That's the key. Now let's talk about stress. Stress is often story-based. The future hasn't happened. The past is over, but the story keeps replaying. What if this fails? What if they judge me? What if I lose everything? Those are not facts. They are imagined outcomes. Imagined threats trigger real stress. Your body doesn't know the difference. So you suffer in advance. You have a choice. You don't need certainty about the future. You need accuracy in the present. Facts anchor you. Stories pull you into fear. That's the difference. Let's talk about leadership. Weak leaders react to stories. They assume intent. They personalize outcomes. They escalate emotionally. Strong leaders slow down. They ask, what data do we have? What assumptions are we making? What problem are we actually solving? They don't get lost in narratives. They focus on reality. That's why people trust them. Trust follows clarity. You have a choice. Let's talk about identity again. Most people live inside stories about themselves. I'm behind. I missed my chance. I'm not like them. Those are stories, not facts. Fact, you are here. Fact, you are learning. Fact, you are capable of adjustment. Stories limit. Facts empower. That's the key. This chapter is not about optimism. It's about truth. Truth is quieter than story. Less dramatic, more useful. Your life improves when you respond to what is, not what you imagine. You don't need their permission to see clearly. You don't need your mind's permission either. Clear thinking is your responsibility. You now understand something critical. Your mind tells stories to feel safe. Those stories create suffering. Separating fact from story gives you relief. But there is still a challenge. Even with clarity, decisions must be made, and not every thought deserves execution. You've learned to see clearly. Now you must learn to filter. What thoughts deserve action? Which ones do you ignore? This is where mastery becomes practical. Chapter 9. Build a thinking filter for decisions. Clarity without execution is useless. Execution without filtering is dangerous. That's the key. By now you see clearly. You can separate facts from stories. You can question thoughts. You can interrupt emotion. But here is the problem. Your mind still produces thousands of thoughts every day. If you try to analyze all of them, you freeze. If you act on all of them, you implode. So you need a filter. Not a feeling, not intuition, a system. You have a choice. High performers are not better thinkers because they think more. They are better thinkers because they think less but decide better. They filter aggressively. They understand this truth. Not every thought deserves execution. Say it again. Not every thought deserves execution. Most people never build a filter that they decide case by case, moment by moment, based on mood. That creates inconsistency. Inconsistency destroys trust. Trust in yourself. Trust from others. You have a choice. A thinking filter answers one question clearly. What deserves action and what does not? Once that is answered, discipline becomes easier. Let's build your filter. This is not a theory. This is a behavioral system you will use every day. First principle, thoughts are cheap, actions are expensive. Every action costs time, energy, reputation, focus, or opportunity. So you do not act just because a thought appeared. You act when a thought passes the filter. That's the key. Here is the first filter question. Is this thought aligned with my long-term direction? Not comfort. Not relief. Direction. Most thoughts aim at short-term comfort. Avoid this conversation. Check out mentally as distract yourself. Delay. Those thoughts feel helpful. They are not. If a thought does not move you toward who you are trying to become, it fails the filter. You let it pass. You don't need their permission to ignore it. You don't need your mind's permission either. Second filter question. Is this thought based on facts or emotion? You already learned the difference. Facts deserve consideration. Emotion deserves acknowledgement, not obedience. If a thought is driven by fear, anger, or excitement, you delay action. Delay is part of the filter. Delay allows emotion to fade and clarity to rise. That's discipline. Third filter question. Will acting on this improve the situation or just express how I feel? This is critical. Expression feels good in the moment. Improvement feels good later. Most people choose expression. High performers choose improvement. You have a choice. If the action only vents emotion but worsens the outcome, it fails the filter. You let it go. Fourth filter question: is this reversible or irreversible? Some decisions are light, others are heavy. If a decision is irreversible, you slow down. You gather more data, you ask better questions. Speed is only useful when the cost of error is low. Rushing irreversible decisions is impulsiveness, not confidence. That's the key. Now let's apply this filter to real life. Scenario 1. Communication. You feel the urge to send a message. Emotion is present. You run the filter. Is this aligned with my long-term direction? Does emotion drive this? Will this improve the situation, or will it just express how I feel? Is this reversible? Most emotional messages fail, so you don't send. Not because you are weak, because you are disciplined. Scenario 2. Opportunities. A new opportunity appears. Excitement spikes. Your mind says, "This could be big." You pause. You run the filter. Does this align with my direction, or is it a distraction? Is this based on data or optimism? What is the opportunity cost? What am I saying no to if I say yes? This prevents scattered lives. You have a choice. Scenario 3. Self-talk. A thought says, "I'm behind. I should be further." You run the filter. Is this thought factual? Does acting on it improve anything? What action does it actually suggest? Usually it suggests nothing useful. So you discard it. You replace it with action-focused thinking. What is the next concrete step? That passes the filter. You act. That's the key. A filter turns thinking into execution. Without it, clarity becomes noise. Now let's address a common fear. People think filtering thoughts means suppressing intuition. It doesn't. It refines it. Real intuition is calm. It is not frantic, and it does not demand immediate action. Urgent intuition is usually fear. The filter separates the two. You have a choice. Here is another principle. If a thought repeats without producing action, it is mental clutter. Clutter drains focus. You either act or you drop it. No looping. Looping is disguised avoidance. That's the key. Now let's talk about standards. Your filter reflects your standards. Low standards allow many thoughts to pass. High standards allow very few. That's why disciplined people look calm. They are not processing everything. They are ignoring most things. Ignoring is a skill. You don't need their permission to ignore noise. You don't need your mind's permission either. Noise does not deserve attention. Let's install a simple daily rule. If a thought does not lead to a clear, useful action within 5 minutes, you drop it. No rumination, no analysis paralysis, action, or discard. This rule alone will free enormous mental energy. You have a choice. Now let's talk about fear-based thoughts. Fear-based thoughts often pretend to be responsible. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? You run the filter. Is there a specific risk I can mitigate? If yes, plan. If no, stop thinking. Generalized fear fails the filter. Specific risk passes. That's the difference between anxiety and preparation. Anxiety spins. Preparation acts. Your filter makes that distinction. That's the key. Now let's talk about discipline. Discipline is not forcing yourself to act on every thought. Discipline is choosing which thoughts get action at all. Most people reverse this. They try to force action while allowing mental chaos. That never works. You clean the input first, filter the thoughts, then act decisively. You have a choice. By now, your thinking has structure. You pause, you question, You interrupt. You separate facts from stories. You filter decisions. This is not overthinking. This is precision. Precision creates consistency. Consistency creates trust. Trust creates authority. Authority over yourself comes first. You don't need motivation, you need standards. Your filter is your standard. Now let's connect this chapter to the larger theme. This audiobook is about control, not controlling the world, controlling yourself. A thinking filter is how control becomes practical. Without it, clarity fades under pressure. With it, pressure sharpens you. You have a choice. You can continue reacting to whatever your mind produces, or you can decide deliberately what deserves action. Your mind produces thoughts. You decide which ones deserve authority. You've built the filter. Now comes the final discipline. Even with a filter, pressure will test you, stress will compress time, urgency will return, emotion will rise. The last skill determines mastery. Thinking clearly when it matters most. You built awareness. You built a structure. Now you must apply it under fire. Chapter 10. Discipline is thinking under pressure. Anyone can think clearly when life is calm. That proves nothing. Pressure is the test. That's the key. Pressure exposes what is trained and what is not. It strips away intention. It reveals a habit. When stress rises, you do not rise to your knowledge. You fall to your discipline. You have a choice. Most people believe pressure creates mistakes. It doesn't. Pressure reveals the thinking patterns that were already there. If you react under pressure, you've always been reactive. If you rush under pressure, you are always impatient. If you panic under pressure, you've always relied on emotion. Pressure just removes the mask. That's the key. Discipline is not control when things go well. Discipline is clarity when things go wrong, and that clarity must be trained in advance. Let's be clear. Pressure is unavoidable. Deadlines, conflict, risk, loss, uncertainty. You do not eliminate pressure. You prepare for it. You have a choice. Most people prepare by hoping. I'll handle it when it happens. I'll figure it out. That is not preparation. That is optimism. Hope collapses under pressure. Structure does not. High performers do not trust their emotions when pressure hits. They trust their systems. That's the difference. Let's look at what pressure does to the untrained mind. Pressure narrows attention, it speeds up thinking, it amplifies emotion. Fear gets louder, urgency increases, short-term thinking dominates. That's why people say things they regret, spend money impulsively, quit too early, escalate conflict. Not because they wanted to, because pressure was removed from their brakes. You have a choice. Discipline installs brakes, no hesitation. Control. The disciplined thinker slows down under pressure, everyone else speeds up. That alone separates outcomes. That's the key. Let's talk about the most dangerous illusion. People think acting fast under pressure is a strength. It's not. Speed without accuracy is recklessness. Real strength is the ability to pause when everything demands reaction. That pause is rare, and rare skills create rare outcomes. You have a choice. Here is the most important rule of this chapter. When pressure rises, reduce decisions. Say it again. When pressure rises, reduce decisions. Pressure already consumes mental energy. Adding unnecessary decisions drains clarity. This is why disciplined people simplify under stress. They fall back on principles, rules, filters. They don't debate every option. They already decided how they decide. That's mastery. Let's make this practical. Under pressure, you do three things. First, you narrow your focus. You ask, What matters most right now? Not everything, not later, now. This cuts through overwhelm. Overwhelm comes from trying to solve everything at once. Clarity comes from prioritization. That's the key. Second, you slow the body. Pressure lives in physiology. Fast breathing fuels panic. Tension fuels impulsiveness. You slow your breathing. You relax your jaw. You drop your shoulders. This is not relaxation for comfort. This is a regulation for control. A regulated body supports a disciplined mind. You don't need their permission to slow down. You don't need your mind's permission either. Third, you apply the filter. You already built it. Is this aligned with the direction? Is this based on facts or emotion? Will this improve the outcome? Is this reversible? Pressure does not cancel the filter. It makes it more important. Most people abandon structure under stress. Disciplined people rely on it. That's the difference. You have a choice. Let's look at real-world pressure. Conflict. Someone confronts you unexpectedly. Tone is sharp, emotion spikes, reaction wants dominance now. Discipline pauses. You don't escalate. You don't explain immediately. You don't defend reflexively. You say less. You listen more. Often the other person reveals their position. Reaction gives away leverage. Calm retains it. That's the key. Another example, failure. Something goes wrong. Time pressure appears. Your mind says, fix it fast. That urgency often makes things worse. Discipline asks, what actually broke? What is the smallest effective correction? You fix the root, not the symptom. Calm thinking under pressure prevents compounding errors. You have a choice. Another example, opportunity under pressure. A fast-moving opportunity appears, fear of missing out rises. Your mind says, decide now. Pressure disguises itself as opportunity. You pause, you ask, what happens if I wait? What is the cost of saying yes too fast? Often, waiting improves the deal or reveals the risk. Those who rush pay premiums. Those who wait negotiate from strength. That's the key. Let's talk about internal pressure. Self-imposed pressure is the most destructive. I should be further. I'm running out of time. I can't mess this up. Those thoughts feel motivating. They are not. They compress thinking. They increase error. They fuel burnout. Discipline removes emotional language. You replace it with operational thinking. What is the next useful action? What is under my control today? This grounds you. Pressure feeds on vagueness. Clarity starves it. You have a choice. Here is a hard truth. If pressure regularly overwhelms you, the problem is not pressure. It is preparation. You are not weak, you are untrained. And training is possible. That's the message of this audiobook. Discipline is not talent, it is practice. You practice pausing. You practice filtering. You practice questioning. You practice separating facts from stories. So when pressure arrives, you don't invent control, you deploy it. That's mastery. You don't need their permission to stay composed. You don't need circumstances to be calm either. Calm is a skill. Let's install one final rule. Under pressure, do less deliberately. Fewer words, fewer actions, better timing. You don't need to prove anything at the moment. Outcomes matter more than appearances. That's the key. This chapter completes the system. You now understand the full chain. Your mind is not on your side by default. Thoughts are suggestions, not orders. Emotion is not intelligence. Reaction must be interrupted. Certainty is an illusion. Questions create clarity. Bias distorts perception. Stories create suffering. Filters create discipline, and pressure reveals mastery. You have a choice. Most people will hear this and return to old habits, not because they disagree, but discipline requires repetition. You are different. If you apply even one rule from this audiobook consistently, your life changes. Not instantly, inevitably. Control is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is boring. It is powerful. You don't need motivation. You need standards. And now, you have them. You have learned how to control your thinking before it controls you. The question is no longer whether you can. The question is whether you will. You've now reached the end of this audiobook. And if you've stayed this far, you've already done something most people never do. You finished what you started. That alone separates you. Now let's lock this in. This audiobook was not about ideas, it was about control. You learned that your mind is not on your side by default. It evolved for survival, not clarity, not truth, not success. You learned that thoughts are suggestions, not orders, and that obeying every thought is the fastest way to lose control of your life. You learned that emotion is not intelligence. Fear, anger, and excitement are signals, not guides. And strong emotion is the moment to pause, not act. You learned how to interrupt a reaction, how to create a pause, how to slow the body so the mind can lead. You learned that certainty is often an illusion, that rushing to conclusions feels safe, but quietly traps you, and that disciplined thinkers tolerate uncertainty long enough to see clearly. You learn to think in terms of questions rather than conclusions, because questions open reality, while conclusions close it. You learn that cognitive bias is always operating, quietly shaping what you notice, what you ignore, and what you believe. And that awareness of bias is power. You learn to separate facts from stories, because facts are neutral and stories are optional. And most suffering comes from confusing the two. You learned how to build a thinking filter, so not every thought becomes an action. So discipline replaces impulse. And finally, you learned the ultimate truth. Discipline is thinking clearly under pressure. Not when life is calm, but when it is difficult, uncertain, and demanding. This is the system. Not motivation, not inspiration, standards. And now comes the most important part. Knowledge changes nothing without repetition. If you go back to reacting automatically tomorrow, this audiobook becomes entertainment. If you apply even one rule consistently, it becomes a transformation. You have a choice. Pause before reacting. Question before concluding. Filter before acting. Again and again. Day after day. That is how control is built. Now, if this audiobook resonated with you, there is one next listen that connects directly to what you've just learned. From reaction to action, the ultimate guide to financial self-mastery. This audiobook takes everything you learned here and applies it directly to money, decisions, discipline, and long-term wealth behavior. Because uncontrolled thinking doesn't just cost peace, it costs money, opportunity, and freedom. If you want the next level of mastery, that is where to go next. And before you leave, do this. Subscribe to this channel, not for motivation, not for noise, for structure, for discipline, for clarity. This channel is for people who refuse to be controlled by their own minds. The question now is simple. You know what to do. You know how to think. Will you apply it? That decision is yours.